Great to be with you, live from Johannesburg. This is eNCA Moneyline, your money guide. I'm Gareth Edwards. Sikim Gabadeli is away for this evening. A very busy show. Here's what we have for you. The World Bank says South Africa's policies have helped reduce poverty for over 3.6 million people. We unpack that in a short while. Government, Labour and civil society all looking into a possible national minimum wage. And always a very popular feature here on the show, our Tuesday entrepreneurship segment, looking at franchising. Does it work? How does it work? And can you make it work? First, here's our top stories. Well, the issue around a national minimum wage continues to spark debate around the country. The Labour Minister, Mildred Oliphant, recently indicated that the discussion has now moved beyond whether a minimum wage is needed or not. But business maintains such a wage will not actually help create jobs.
Fresh from South Africa's biggest labour unrest since the dawn of democracy, government, civil society, labour and business are all searching for a united front to prevent further damage to the country's economy.
The one thing that we all know is that social dialogue is not an event, but a process. And that sometimes it produces the results we all agree to, and sometimes it doesn't. It is sometimes quick, and sometimes it is painstakingly slow.
A national minimum wage has long formed a major part of national discussions. Representatives from Labour and general society suggest that the time has now come to implement this policy.
COSATU has researched about this, and we are clear that there are many countries we can count which are implementing the national minimum wage. It is indeed an ingredient in addressing the poverty situation, the inequalities situation. Even if you would resolve the unemployment situation, but the first two keys are critical.
But business says the move will not help grow the country's economy nor tackle unemployment.
If you introduce the national minimum wage without due consideration for other factors, such as, most critically, the need for creating employment, what will we achieve in that? So we're saying, first and foremost, this economy must create jobs.
Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa will continue to lead discussions. He believes the parties are close to an agreement, but that more consultation is still necessary.
There are issues on which all of you as social partners agree on, and yet there are a number of other issues on which you do not agree. But there are also a number of issues where together we are going to walk on an uncharted path.
None of the parties have dismissed outright the idea of a national minimum wage, but many questions remain unanswered. These include what the correct wage amount should be and whether that figure would facilitate job creation. On the surface, a final agreement appears to be a long way off.
That's the problem. It's all about the timeline and just how far off it actually is. Arabella Gumedi with that report. Well, South African tax revenues used for social benefit programs are helping the poor. That's according to a new report issued by the World Bank in Pretoria early today. It's fascinating reading. The SA economic data update shows that 3.6 million people were lifted out of poverty in the 2010-2011 financial year. It actually found that tax and social benefits are effectively redistributing income from the rich to the poor. Here's a number for you. Out of 12 sample countries, South Africa has shown the largest poverty reductions due to our current fiscal policy. Some of the other countries, if you're interested, that were sampled include Bolivia, interestingly Brazil because of BRICS, Ethiopia and Uruguay. However, even with a progressive tax system in place, we are still one of the most unequal countries in the entire world. Let's discuss this a bit more and unpack it for you here on Moneyline. I'm joined by the World Bank's lead economist for South Africa and other countries, in fact. Catriona Purfield is with us. Catriona, lovely to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your time. I think before we unpack what this all means, this 3.6 million that we've gotten out of poverty, what does the World Bank define as poverty?
We're basically looking at the share of the population living on less than $2.50 a day. So it's actually not that much.
It's 20-odd rand,
Yes.
I think, these days. All right, let's talk about the report at the moment. The report says that South Africa's taxpayers' money is being used positively. Is that all you can take away from this, that we are alleviating those that are living under that breadline and giving them a chance at life? Is it as simple as that?
It is, but it's also a little bit more. We also find that because South Africa taxes the rich and gives that money to the poor to lift their incomes, it also reduces inequality quite substantially too. The Gini coefficient on inequality, we all know, is very high in South Africa. Before you use fiscal policy, it's as high as 0.77. But after you use those fiscal transfers, both the taxes and the spending on social grants, you narrow that to 0.59, a reduction of a quarter, which is the biggest of all the 12 countries that we have in our sample.
It's very interesting, the countries that we compare to, as I mentioned in the intro too. You can have Uruguay, you can have Bolivia. However, Brazil, of course, will interest us particularly because of our grouping with the BRICS nations. Is that a more fair way of comparing us? And how do we look against, for example, Brazil? Not to go into the exact numbers, but how do we compare with a country that we are in some kind of economic agreement with?
Well, it's certainly one of your peers, and South Africa is still more unequal than Brazil, even after using fiscal policy. So there's two facts here. South Africa is achieving more with its fiscal policy than Brazil, which we found surprising initially when we look at the data. It's very effective in South Africa at redistributing income, even more so than Brazil. But despite that, fiscal policy is working so hard, the level of inequality is so high to begin with in South Africa that you still end up with inequality higher than what even Brazil starts with before it uses a fiscal policy. The problem is the starting point of inequality here. It's so
and the problem with the starting point of inequality is while we are catching up, the population is going to, of course, keep growing as well. Where do we get ahead of the curve here, do you think?
I think what needs to happen in South Africa is to complement its fiscal policy with greater growth that generates jobs, especially at the lower end of the income distribution. This is critical because fiscal policy can't do all the lifting itself. We certainly need higher growth that's more inclusive and generates jobs at the lower end of the income distribution.
I always love when an expert like you brings it up. It's higher growth and jobs. You can't have both at the same time. One has to come first. Which is first? Jobs or the higher growth? Which is going to produce which?
They both go together. One can target growth that looks at generating jobs for the low-skilled. So it's very important that South Africa begins to implement structural reforms that brings that about. What type of things are we talking about? Well, you need investment coming to South Africa. You need to address the infrastructure bottlenecks. You need to have greater certainty in labour relations. And you need to ensure that you're using your existing fiscal money on items like education as effectively as possible to ensure that people, when they leave school, are actually educated and skilled enough to get the jobs that are available in South Africa.
That's down to the education again, as is always the case. We were talking about, in the intro to you, this report talking about 2010, 2011. How often does this report actually get conducted, and how often do you release the research? Is it every single year, or do you wait a few years to try and get real hard data?
The hard data that underpins this report is actually the household survey data that's coming from Stats SA, which is only done every 5 years. And we're able to link that with the government spending data that comes out every year. So one could look at this more frequently, but for our study, we just looked at it for that year. It would be very interesting to look at that study over time and see how people progress and use the social transfers to help lift them out of poverty and maybe over a generation to improve their livelihoods.
Overall, as a final question to you, if we could, Catriona, are you overly optimistic, or are you quite happy with the way it's going now, or do you see it really improving drastically in the years to come?
Listen, it's very plain that the level of inequality and poverty in South Africa is still too high, even though fiscal policy is working very hard. South Africa desperately needs to lift its growth rates and to generate the jobs to help fiscal policy make even further inroads going forward.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to that, and thank you very much indeed for coming in this evening. Unpack what is quite a complicated situation as well when it comes to alleviating poverty in the country. A huge pleasure. Catriona Purfield, the World Bank's lead economist for South Africa and some of the other countries in our region as well. Very busy show for you, as I mentioned. Coming up after the break, we take a look at how you can go about franchising your business. Even if you've done it, are you doing it well enough? We'll be speaking to an expert about that.